Welcome back to the Anti-Cancer Lab. If you're new here, pull up a chair. You're in good company. This is where I read the cancer studies most people never see and tell you, plainly, what they mean for your plate. No fear, no hype. So grab a coffee and let's look at this together. Today's one surprised me, and I've been doing this a long time. We're going to talk about melatonin, the sleep molecule, and a claim that's been bouncing around the internet that it somehow starves cancer cells. And along the way, I'm going to hand you a short list of little foods that are quietly some of the richest natural sources of it. Foods you already walk past at the supermarket. Quick note before we start, because on this channel I never skip it. I'm Dr. Becker. I'm a researcher, not your doctor, and I've never had cancer or treated a single patient. Everything you're about to hear is me translating published studies for general education. None of it is medical advice. None of it replaces your oncologist or your treatment. And nothing I say should ever be a reason to take a high-dose supplement on your own. Please don't megadose anything off the back of a YouTube video, including this one. Bring what's useful to the people actually caring for you, and let them steer. So here's how today started. I read a paper at 2 in the morning that I can't stop thinking about. I couldn't sleep, which, given the topic, is almost funny. And I went down a rabbit hole on melatonin, the hormone your own brain makes in the dark to tell your body it's nighttime. And I kept running into this bold claim, the kind that travels fast online. The claim is that melatonin starves cancer cells by shutting off the strange way they eat. And I'll be honest with you, my first reaction was a tired eye roll. I've seen 100 of these. A compound does something interesting in a dish, somebody writes a headline, and 3 weeks later your cousin is buying it by the bottle. But I want to be careful here, because I'm about to disagree with the loud version of this story, and I'm also going to tell you the part that's genuinely real and genuinely interesting. Because there is a real mechanism here. There's a reason serious cancer researchers actually study this molecule. The problem isn't that it's nonsense. The problem is the distance between what happens in a petri dish and what happens in a living person. That distance is the whole story. So let me walk you through it slowly, and by the end you'll be able to spot the hype yourself. To understand the claim, you first have to understand a 100-year-old observation called the Warburg effect. And I promise you, I'm going to make this plain. Back in 1931, a German scientist named Otto Warburg won a Nobel Prize for noticing something odd about cancer cells. A normal healthy cell in your body is a careful, efficient little engine. When it needs energy, it takes in glucose, which is just sugar, and it burns that sugar slowly and completely using oxygen, squeezing out a lot of energy from a little fuel. Warburg noticed that cancer cells don't do that. Even when oxygen is sitting right there, plenty of it, many cancer cells refuse to burn their fuel the clean, efficient way. Instead, they gulp down enormous amounts of sugar and burn it fast and sloppy, the way your muscles do in a hard sprint when they're starved for air. Here's the one analogy I want you to hold on to. A healthy cell is like a careful driver getting 40 miles to the gallon on the highway. A cancer cell is like a hot rod idling in the driveway, engine roaring, burning through a full tank just sitting there, getting maybe 4 miles to the gallon. It's wildly wasteful. It guzzles sugar at a rate that would bankrupt a normal cell. That wasteful sugar-guzzling habit is the Warburg effect, and it's one of the most reliable fingerprints of cancer we know of. In fact, that's exactly what a PET scan looks for. When you get one of those whole-body cancer scans, they inject a tiny bit of radioactive sugar, and the tumors light up like Christmas lights, because they're slurping up that sugar faster than anything else in the body. Now, where does melatonin come in? This is the interesting part, and I'll tell you what I'd actually want on my own plate in a minute. In laboratory studies, in dishes of cells and in some animals, melatonin appears to interfere with that sugar guzzling. The early lab work suggests it can nudge a cancer cell's metabolism back toward the slow, careful, oxygen-burning way, which the cell doesn't like, and under certain conditions, push those cells toward apoptosis, which is just the body's word for programmed cell death. The orderly self-destruct switch that cancer cells are famous for ignoring. And let me say that plainly, so the legal line is crystal clear. That is a thing observed in cells in a dish and in some rodents. It is not a thing proven to shrink a tumor in a human being. Hold that thought, because it's the hinge of the whole video. So what's the play takeaway from the mechanism itself? Honestly, it's modest and it's free. Your own body makes melatonin in the dark, and you make less of it as you age, and less of it when you stare at a bright screen at midnight. So the most evidence-backed, completely free thing you can do with all of this is simple. Sleep in a properly dark room. Give yourself a wind down before bed, and stop feeding your eyes blue light at 1 in the morning the way I was doing when I found that paper. That costs nothing, and the sleep and health evidence behind it is far stronger than any supplement bottle. And let me linger on the sleep angle for a second, because it's the most honest and the most overlooked piece of this whole conversation. There's a body of population research, the kind that follows large groups of people over many years, that has looked at folks who work permanent night shifts or who chronically sleep badly, and found a higher rate of certain cancers in those groups. The World Health Organization's cancer arm has even flagged long-term night shift work as a probable factor worth taking seriously. Now I have to be careful and honest about what that does and doesn't mean. That is an association in big populations, not proof. And night shift workers differ from the rest of us in a dozen ways beyond their melatonin. But it points, gently, in the same direction as the lab work. Protecting your own nightly melatonin by sleeping in real darkness may matter more than anything you could ever swallow. That's the part the supplement sellers will never put on the label, because you can't sell a dark room. So picture this, the simplest sensory thing. A bedroom with the curtains actually closed, the little glowing lights on the chargers and the cable box either covered or unplugged, and your phone face down on the far side of the room. That black, quiet dark is where your body brews its own supply, free, every single night. Now, that's the mechanism. Here's where it gets practical, and here's the part most people have never heard, the part I actually got excited about. You can eat melatonin. It's not only a hormone your brain makes in the dark, it also occurs naturally, in small amounts, in a handful of ordinary plant foods. And the food that sits, surprisingly, near the very top of that list is one most people think of as a snack you put out at a party: pistachios. Of all the common foods that have been measured, pistachios are one of the richest known dietary sources of natural melatonin by far, dramatically higher per gram than most fruits or vegetables that have been tested. I'll tell you what I'd actually put on my own plate. A small handful of pistachios, the unsalted kind, in the early evening. There's a lovely double logic to it. You're getting a food naturally high in the very molecule we've been talking about. And you're getting it in a form your grandmother would recognize, a nut, with fiber and healthy fat and a bit of protein, which on its own is a genuinely good anti-cancer pattern food, according to the big diet and cancer reviews from groups like the American Institute for Cancer Research. Let me be careful though. Wait, let me back up, because this is exactly where the hype machine grabs the wheel. The amount of melatonin in a handful of pistachios is tiny compared to what's in a supplement pill. We are talking about micro amounts. So nobody should eat pistachios expecting a drug effect on a tumor. That's not the play. The play is that pistachios are a delicious, cheap, shelf-stable food that happens to fit a sane anti-cancer eating pattern and happens to carry this curious little molecule. So at the supermarket, here's exactly what to grab. A bag of plain, unsalted, shelled pistachios. They keep for ages in the cupboard. A small handful most evenings. Pennies compared to a supplement, and you actually get to enjoy them. That's the realistic version. Let me build on that, because pistachios aren't the only one, and the next food on this list is the one the sleep crowd already loves. Tart cherries, specifically the Montmorency variety, the sour ones, not the sweet dark Bing cherries you eat fresh in summer. Montmorency cherries are one of the better studied dietary melatonin sources, and there's a small body of human research, mostly on sleep and on exercise recovery, where tart cherry juice modestly nudged people's own melatonin and helped them sleep a touch better. Now notice what I just did there, and notice it carefully. That research is about sleep, not about cancer. I'm not going to let the two blur together, because that blurring is exactly how a sleep study gets dressed up online as a cancer cure. Let me say it more carefully. Tart cherries have real measured melatonin and some real human sleep data. They do not have human cancer treatment data. Both of those things are true at the same time, and an honest person holds both. So how would I actually use them? Here's the cheap, doable version. You don't need the fancy supplement. A glass of unsweetened tart cherry juice in the evening, or a small handful of dried Montmorency cherries, or the frozen tart cherries from any supermarket freezer, tossed into oatmeal in the morning. Frozen is fine. The frozen kind is often cheaper than fresh and just as good for this. Watch the sugar on the juice, get the unsweetened version and water it down if it's too tart, because loading up on sugary juice would be working against yourself, and we just spent 10 minutes talking about how cancer cells love sugar. So a splash, not a tumbler. That's the move. Which brings me to the next one, and it rounds out what I think of as the little melatonin trio. Walnuts. Walnuts have been measured to contain meaningful amounts of melatonin too. And there's a well-known, older study out of a respected lab that found eating walnuts raised the melatonin detectable in the blood of the animals tested. Walnuts bring something extra to the table though, and this is why I'd reach for them, even setting melatonin aside entirely. They're one of the richest plant sources of omega-3 fats, the same family of healthy fats people chase in fish oil. And those fats show up again and again in the heart and general health literature. Let me be straight about the evidence level, because I always will be on this channel. The walnut and melatonin work is mostly lab and animal work, plus the general observation that nut eaters tend to have better health outcomes in big population studies, which is an association, not proof that the walnut did it. People who eat a handful of nuts a day also tend to do a lot of other things right, so I hold it loosely. But here's the thing, even if you strip the melatonin angle out completely, a small daily handful of walnuts is one of the most consistently sane things in all of nutrition. So the downside is basically zero, and the upside is real. At the supermarket, plain walnut halves, unsalted, a small handful 3 or 4 times a week. Throw them on a salad, into oatmeal, or just eat them out of your hand. No cooking required. Let me give you a few more in this family quickly. Because once you know to look, melatonin turns up in more of the plant world than you'd guess, and I'd rather you have the whole little map than just the headliners. Certain whole grains carry it, particularly rice and oats, and some of the more colorful grains. Tomatoes have a measurable amount, and it concentrates a bit when they're cooked down, so a slow-simmered tomato sauce is a quietly good source. Grapes and the skins of grapes carry some, which is part of why you'll see melatonin mentioned in the same breath as red wine. Though please don't take that as me telling you to drink wine for your health, because the alcohol and cancer evidence cuts hard the other way and I won't pretend otherwise. And a handful of seeds and a few mushrooms have been measured with small amounts too. Even good extra virgin olive oil and some legumes have shown trace amounts in the lab measurements. So if you're eating a colorful, plant-forward plate, you're already getting a little natural melatonin sprinkled through your day without ever thinking about it, and you're getting it wrapped in fiber and color and healthy fat instead of in a pill. That, to me, is the quietly reassuring part of this whole rabbit hole. I sat with a woman last spring, I'll call her Eleanor, a retired school teacher in her late 60s, who came to one of my talks frightened half to death. She'd spent months on the internet after a scare with her mammogram, and she'd been talked into being afraid of nearly every food in her own kitchen, and then talked into a cupboard full of expensive supplements, melatonin among them, that she was swallowing by the fistful at bedtime, hoping. And what struck me, sitting with her, wasn't the bad science she'd absorbed. It was how tired she was, how much joy had drained out of eating for her. When we went through it together, what actually helped her wasn't a new pill. It was permission. Permission to put the fistful of bottles down, to stop being scared of her own plate, and to eat a handful of pistachios in the evening because she genuinely liked them, not because she was dosing herself against a tumor. She told me later it was the first time in a year that food had felt like food again, and not like medicine she was somehow failing at. I think about Eleanor every time one of these miracle claims goes around, because the claim doesn't just cost money, it costs people their peace, and at our age, peace is not a small thing. Now I want to name the obvious objection, because I know what some of you are thinking. This is just another food fad, Becker, a new superfood every week, and you're about to tell me to go spend $40 on pistachio extract. Fair. That's a completely fair thing to be thinking, and honestly it's the right instinct. So let me test it against the evidence, out loud. Here's the honest answer. None of these foods are a superfood, and I'd never sell them to you as one. They are ordinary, cheap, real foods that happen to fit a pattern the big cancer prevention reviews have endorsed for decades. More plants, more nuts and seeds, more fiber, more color on the plate, less sugar, less processed meat, less alcohol. The melatonin is a fun footnote that got me reading at 2 in the morning. The pattern is the actual medicine, and it was true before anyone measured a microgram of melatonin in a pistachio. So no, don't buy the extract, buy the groceries. And let me be straight with you, because this is the part the headlines leave out, and it's the most important part of the whole video. None of this is a cure. A food doesn't kill cancer in your body the way a headline says it does. Let me tell you what does not work, so you don't waste $1, or far worse, a chance. The dangerous version of this story is the one where somebody reads that melatonin pushes cancer cells toward death in a dish, and concludes they should swallow a giant dose of melatonin supplements every night to treat a tumor. I need you to hear me clearly. That is not supported by human evidence, and high doses of melatonin are not harmless. Melatonin is a hormone, not a vitamin. Large doses can leave people groggy and foggy the next day, can stir up vivid dreams, can interact with blood thinners and blood pressure medicines and other drugs, and the long-term effects of megadosing in older adults simply aren't well mapped. There have been some early human trials using melatonin alongside conventional cancer treatment, looking at things like sleep, appetite, and quality of life during chemotherapy, and a few have hinted at modest benefits. But, and this is the whole ballgame, that was always melatonin used alongside real treatment, under medical supervision, never instead of it, and the results are preliminary, not a green light. So if any of this interests you, the move is not the supplement aisle. The move is a conversation with your oncologist, who can look at your actual medicines and your actual situation. I sat across from a fellow last winter, call him Ray, a thoughtful man, retired, who had read that exact melatonin claim and was quietly planning to start taking 10 milligrams a night on his own during his treatment, without telling his care team, because he didn't want to be talked out of it. And when we walked through it together, what struck him cold wasn't that it might not work. It was realizing it could interact with the medication he was already on, and that the very people he was hiding it from were the only ones who could tell him whether it was safe. He brought it to his doctor instead. That's the whole lesson. Anyone who promises you more than that is selling something. So here's your one thing this week, and it's cheap and it's easy. On your next shop, buy 1 bag of plain unsalted pistachios and 1 bag of frozen tart cherries. That's it. In the early evening, instead of the cookies or the chips, a small handful of pistachios, and in the morning, a spoonful of those tart cherries stirred into your oatmeal or your yogurt. You're not treating anything. Let me be clear. You're not dosing a tumor. You're swapping 2 junky snacks for 2 real foods that fit a genuinely good eating pattern and happen to carry this molecule we've been chasing. Total cost, a few dollars. And while you're at it, the free half of the homework, give yourself a properly dark bedroom and an hour away from the bright screen before bed, so your own body can make its own melatonin the way it was designed to. No bottle required. Let me leave you with this. The internet wants every story to be a miracle or a scam, a cure or a con. But the real one is almost always quieter and better than either. There's a genuine, century-old mechanism here. The way cancer cells guzzle sugar like a hot rod idling in the driveway. There's a real molecule, melatonin, that pokes at that mechanism in the lab and that you can find, in friendly little amounts, in pistachios and tart cherries and walnuts. And there's the honest truth that none of it is treatment, that the human evidence is thin and preclinical, that you should never megadose a hormone on your own, and that the real power is in the boring, repeatable pattern on your plate. You hold one lever every single day, 3 times a day, your plate. That's not nothing. Food isn't a cure, but it's the one lever you hold 3 times a day. Use it. Bring this whole melatonin question to your oncologist if it speaks to you, and let the people caring for you do the rest. Keep it simple, keep it on your plate, and I'll see you right back here. Bring a friend who needs this, and tell me in the comments which one you're starting with this week, the pistachios or the tart cherries. I read these.